Here, this is a NASA satellite of the Earth, and these are lights at night. So this is the Korean Peninsula. South Korea is bright with light, and North Korea, it's only Kim Jong-un's bathroom light that's on there. And they used to be one country not so long ago, and Korea has one of the highest rates of MS in Asia, and North Korea apparently doesn't have a single case. So the point there is don't trust statistics, because another way of looking at this is all the rich countries with the most technology and best medicine is where MS is more common. So that makes me more than a little bit suspicious that in countries that are not so well off, people with MS are never diagnosed and they don't appear on statistics. So I'd be a little bit suspicious about statistics. But as I mentioned, in countries which do have good statistics, it does appear that the rate of occurrence of MS is also altering. So this is what I talked about before, the north to south. So in 2009, it's about 130 people per 100,000 with MS in Hobart, but actually up in Brisbane it's still only about 30. So there's more than a 4 times difference, and Australia's about halfway in between. So we're probably about 80 per 100,000 now, maybe a bit higher. That would give approximately 2,400 people with MS in Western Australia. As I mentioned, because of that north and south, people are saying, well, maybe vitamin D is one of the things that's involved, both for your risk and also how severe it might be. But unfortunately, things aren't always that simple. So like the chicken and the egg we've got here, just because things are associated doesn't mean that it's a cause, because there might be one cause that causes both of the things, and just because they happen at the same time or one after the other doesn't mean that it's cause and effect. So here's a picture of the north to south in the northern hemisphere, further away from the equator, but we'll zoom in on it a bit, because although it's usually true in most countries like Australia, United Kingdom and North America, that the further away you go from the equator the greater the risk, it's not like that everywhere. So we've got Italy, it's upside down. The closer you go to the equator, the higher your risk. And in Norway, the closer you go to the North Pole, the lower your risk. So it's upside down. So it's clearly not just as simple as you might think. And plus, in some countries, like Australia and New Zealand, it's very steep risk, but in other places, like North America, it's not that steep. But now we can measure how much ultraviolet different countries get. And this is France, and this is the risk of MS here, and here's the amount of ultraviolet. And you can actually see, perhaps you could be living in a place that's closer to the equator but has more clouds, or perhaps in the far north of Norway near the North Pole, because of the hole in the ozone layer, they get more ultraviolet than they do in the south of Norway, and less MS. So that's something we need to investigate. But it's also clear environment changes a lot in different countries. And I'll give you an example. The Golden Week holiday is the longest holiday in Japan. It's 8 days long. It's actually 2 holidays, and they normally take a day off in the middle and make it a longer one. And this is the beach at Yokohama. That's a 30-minute train ride from centre of Tokyo. So it'd be like going to Burns Beach to go fishing or something. The very same day this photograph was taken in Japan, I took this photo of my sons here in Perth. So you can see, we human beings, depending on where we live, we have very, very different environmental influences, and that affects our risk of disease. What's even more interesting is your month of birth appears to influence your risk of MS. So this is from the Northern Hemisphere. So if you're born in April, you've got a much higher risk of MS than if you're born in November. So that would suggest that something that happens even before you're born has influenced your risk. maybe it's something to do with what your mum did. Not that I want to blame your mother for anything, but it just shows you how complicated it is doing these kind of statistics. And Mark Twain said, for everything there's a simple explanation, but it's usually wrong. So we need to be very objective. Now, something that's very popular to discuss in this state is diet and a low-fat diet. And it was first proposed in Norway that maybe it was protective. However, the Nurses' Health Study in Canada, where they looked at 185,000 nurses over 25 years, didn't find any relationship between low-fat diet and MS. So we'd have to regard this as unproven. And you should also know in some countries, like South Africa, they propose a high-fat diet for MS. Now, for equally dodgy reasons. There are some good things about a low-fat diet. It might reduce the risk of heart disease and be a good way of controlling your weight. But we would believe that a healthy, balanced diet, which is actually usually more low-fat than an average Western diet, is what you should follow. So if you think of a heart diet, that was what we would think on the basis of the science would be the most healthy diet. What's very clear, however, is that smoking is very bad for you, and it's also bad for MS. Not only does it increase your risk of MS slightly, but it quite significantly increases your risk of MS becoming progressive. So an almost 4 times increased risk of MS becoming progressive is something everyone with MS should avoid. So, you know, taking a treatment that reduces risk of progression and then doing something to your body that does heaps more damage than the treatment can help or cope with is not logical. I like to think of the analogy of your body being a machine, a bit like owning a car, but it's got to last you more than 80 years. And it's not quite as easy to repair as a car, and you're not allowed to trade it in. So the decisions you make with respect to your health can have lasting impacts. So if there is anyone in the audience who's smoking, now is a very good time to stop. So some of the things we know are related, and at the top I'll come back to, that's the Epstein-Barr virus, glandular fever virus. We know ultraviolet's important, vitamin D, probably what country you live in, and that I mean early life hygiene. So in countries where you're less likely to die from infectious disease as an infant, the risk of MS is greater. So in places with the lowest infant mortality, that's where we have the highest rate of MS, and of course smoking. Now, Epstein-Barr virus is a glandular fever virus or infectious mononucleosis. It's a very common virus. 92% of Australians have been infected with it. And but in MS patients, it's 100%. So clearly, it's not the cause, but it may be one of the requirements in the domino series of things that has to happen before one can get MS. And it is a very interesting virus because in countries with low risk of MS, you tend to get this virus quite young, in infancy really, you know. And but in Western societies, we tend to get it when we become teenagers in high school sometimes called the kissing disease, because that's how it's spread. Maybe we're not kissing our babies enough.